Go, Mark.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Clevey. I'm the host of the GLREA Renewable Energy Seminar tonight. I'm also the vice president of GLREA and a lifetime member. Tonight, Thursday, October 13th, we're going to have a presentation by Will D. Kenworthy, who's the regulatory director of Michigan Vote Solar. Title of his talk is Implications of the Inflation Reduction Act on Solar Energy-Related Public Policy in Michigan. Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, it was formed in 1991. We're in our 31st year. We're a nonprofit corporation supported by members to educate and advocate for renewable energy public policy in Michigan. And we've been doing that for 31 years. You can join the GLR solution and protect all of our solar freedoms by going to our website and clicking on membership. Our renewable energy seminar is part of a 4-part series that happened every Thursday night of every month. We are the second Thursday. It's hosted by myself again. We cover topics of interest of renewable energy businesses, users, stakeholders, and advocates. Seminars include content ranging from technology to business to public policy. Any questions or comments and suggestions about ways to improve things should be sent to me. And again, we ask you please remember to mute yourself right now. Also hold all of your questions until the end of the presentation so we make sure that we get through it. You can raise your hand under reactions and I will call on you to ask your question. So I want to thank Will Kenworthy, our regulatory director of Midwest Solar, to our October seminar. Tonight, Will will talk about the implications of the Inflation Reduction Act on solar energy policy in Michigan. Will Kenworthy is, again, as a regulatory director, where he's shaping public policies to transition to equitable clean energy. Since 2018, he's been doing this. He holds a BSFF from FS from Georgetown University and a master's of public and private management from Yale University. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act has generated much buzz about renewable energy public policy in the United States, of course, in Michigan. There are those of us, however, who remember that it was in 1969 when President Richard Nixon's advisor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, wrote a memo describing a startling future. The increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere caused by burning gas and oil and coal would dangerously heat the planet, melt the glaciers, and cause the seas to rise. Goodbye, New York. Goodbye, Washington, for that matter. And so, Will, we want to ask you, what do you think? Is the Inflation Reduction Act real or simply a soothing elevator music played by fossil fuel interests to accompany the goodbye to New York, Washington, and of course, Michigan? Take it away, Will.
All right. Let me see if we can switch this share screen. All right. Did that work?
Works great.
All right. Thank you, Mark. And I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you. Ever since this bill, first saw the light of day, and I guess it was late July. I think everyone has been very excited about it with good reason. And I also think, as we'll talk about a little later, I think we may be underestimating the impact that this bill is going to have, not just in Michigan, but everywhere. I'll just start off with a little plug for Vote Solar. So many of you probably know us, but we are a national nonprofit advocacy organization focused on an equitable transition to clean energy. My national program director always says that, our destination is an equitable clean energy future, and solar is the train that we are riding to it. We work at the state level almost exclusively, doing legislative and regulatory work. My part of that is doing the regulatory work, and I'm based in the Midwest. I'm based in Chicago and spend most of my headspace in virtual Michigan and actual Michigan when I get a chance, but also spend some time in Minnesota and Illinois. So I get an interesting sort of regional perspective on how these issues are playing out in very different states. So we're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act here, and we can do a whole nother seminar, and you probably have, on the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, the infrastructure bill that passed last year. But just to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, it was, there was a lot in it besides energy. And when it was passed on August 16th, the estimate was there's going to be about $369 billion in climate and energy related investment in it. But that was only a part of the overall package. The overall revenue package was $739 billion. And spending was about $433 billion. And about $300 billion was just going to go straight to deficit reduction. So tonight, we're going to talk just about not just the $369 billion climate and energy investment part of it, but more specifically, the $270 billion of that was through taxes. And this is just another slide that I won't talk through it, but just sort of talks about some of the other important things that happened in the Inflation Reduction Act, like capping drug prices, capping out-of-pocket drug prices, lowering healthcare premiums, and just general deficit reduction. In the tax incentives, so like narrowing down the funnel here a little bit, what I'm going to talk about tonight is the tax incentive part of this related to clean energy production. And there's a couple of different parts of this. The residential investment tax credit for solar is in IRS code section 25D, and that was extended. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the business investment tax credit, which is a huge part of this bill. And the business tax credit has both an investment tax credit, and a lot of people have talked about, and I think is emerging as an increasingly important tool for solar, is going to be the production tax credit that was extended to solar, and have mostly just been for wind heretofore. And then I want to touch briefly on the manufacturing production credits, which I think are an underappreciated and important part of this bill that are going to drive costs down. So not only are we driving down the cost of installing solar energy arrays, but we're also reducing the cost of the components down, both for the panels, for inverters, for trackers, and for battery storage. So, and the other thing I want to keep in mind as we're going into this discussion about what's in the bill is there's a lot in the bill, and a lot of it is going to have to be implemented through the Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Treasury actions to provide the guidance that's required in this. And for every individual little part of this, there's a different requirement about how and when the department is required to produce guidance on that. And guidance, for those of you who aren't spend all your time in tax, well, let me back up for 1 second and do my disclaimer that I'm not an attorney and I'm not providing any tax advice, obviously, since I'm not an attorney, I can't do that. I'm going to be talking about what I've learned about the bill and what is in the bill, and not providing any advice about what anyone should do on any of these things. So to the discussion about the guidance for what is, how all these things are going to be implemented, because there's some complicated things that are going to need to be clarified about what's eligible and what's not in all of these different tax provisions. And this is going to come in the form of a number of different sort of venues, types of guidance that the Department of Treasury and the Internal Revenue Service will provide. First of all, sort of at the top and working our way down, there's Treasury regulations, and those are formal rulemakings that the Department of Treasury will do that will provide sort of the highest level guidance. Then going down the funnel of the types of guidance is these, notices, revenue procedures, revenue rulings, and announcements that the Internal Revenue Service will make. So they might say, they might release some preliminary guidance on how the investment tax credit will apply to low-income communities under the allocated tax credits. Or, hopefully they'll start out pretty soon with some general guidance to some of these things. And then going down, down the funnel again, down to the next layer of the types of guidance that we can expect to see are the forms and instructions in the publication. So every year when you get your, 1040, you have the forms and the booklet that goes with it that explains how you fill that form out. Those are going to be important in providing investors and homeowners and all types of people for how they're going to actually implement and take advantage of these tax benefits. And then there's the more general, facts and news releases and fact sheets that the IRS and the Treasury Department will release. There are of the many different types of tax credits that are in this thing, in the IRA, the department is starting to figure out now how and when they're going to release the guidance. There are some categories of guidance that they're required to issue within 180 days of the enactment of the bill, which was back in August. And that'll have some of the more complicated stuff like what is an energy community? How are some of these low income tax credits going to be allocated? Some of those big pictures, the workforce and prevailing wage and apprenticeship provisions, which actually have a lot of uncertainty, are going to have to be clarified through guidance. And so the IRS and the White House and the Department of the Treasury have started this, and they recently on October 6th, it's about a week ago, put out a request for comments on 6 topics. And so these are the general topics of different tax-related provisions that are in the bill that they're looking for suggestions on how to do this. And if you're interested in this, I'll put a link in this presentation when we send it around. But that energy generation incentives one is the first one that's related to all these tax provisions that we're talking about. And they're asking for clarification and advice on what stakeholders want to see out of the different parts of this that are going to have to be clarified. So let's start with the residential tax credit. Everyone knows the residential tax credit was extended. It had been on a schedule to reduce from 26% this year to 22% in 2023, and then down to nothing starting in 2024. The IRA extended that the full 30% through 2032, and then it'll step down again starting in 2033 and 2034. That tax credit will be applicable to any residential customer who's installing any of these technologies that are listed here. So a lot of things, including qualified battery storage and heat pumps and all kinds of good stuff. There is a whole separate category of energy efficiency and other types of home energy improvements that are in the code that I'm not even talking about tonight. I'm just focusing on solar. So onto the business tax credit. The business tax credit is in section 48 of the Internal Revenue Code, and it governs utility scale, commercial, industrial, nonprofits governs, and third-party owned residential tax credits, right? So with a third-party owned system, the investor, the financer, is taking the tax credit. So all these provisions are applicable to third-party owned residential solar, which is sort of important, I think, since a lot of these bonus credits that make this an incredibly rich opportunity will only be applicable there, and they're not available to individual residential customers. So there's two parts of this. There's the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And the base tax credit is, and there are, with the investment tax credit, there is one stack of things available to projects that are 1 megawatt and less, and one stack of credits that are available to projects that are 1 megawatt and more. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to talk here only about the projects that are 1 megawatt and less. The projects that are 1 megawatt and more have the same total value available to them, but it's broken up differently because there are different requirements about prevailing wage, apprenticeships, domestic content that are applicable to the large projects than the small projects. So this chart that I've prepared here, it shows, sorry, this chart here shows the stack of tax credits that are available for in the business tax credits for projects that are 1 megawatt and smaller. And it starts with that bar at the bottom, which is the base investment tax credit of 30%, which is extended as similar to the residential tax credit through 2033. But there are the next 2 layers up, is the bonus for meeting domestic content minimum requirements, and the next one up is the bonus for siting in energy communities. Those 2 bonuses are available, they're uncapped, and they're available to any projects that meet the criteria that are available there. The next 2 layers up, the low income community as defined by the new market tax credit or sited on indigenous land, and the one above it, the qualified low income residential building project or qualified low income building benefit project, are available. They're called allocated tax credits, and those are only going to be available in a limited amount each year for a certain number of projects that meet those criteria. It's capped at 1.8 gigawatts per year for those tax credits. That doesn't sound like it sounds like a lot, but it's actually going to go really quickly because a lot of projects are going to qualify that. And I know that a lot of community solar developers who develop low income projects think that is tailor-made for them, and they're planning to get a piece of that, and they're already thinking about how that allocation for those 1.8 gigawatts per year is going to go. But you can see that potentially, if you could stack every value up there, and I'm actually not positive that you can stack those last 2, the 10% low income for the new market tax credit or indigenous land category, and the 20% low income residential building or low income economic benefit project. I'm not positive if you can stack those 2 or not, but you can. There's a clear path forward to getting to a 50% investment tax credit through the energy community and the domestic content minimums. All right. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what those 2 things mean in a minute. But before we move on and go a layer deeper on this, I just want to mention that the production tax credit is there too. And that has a similar breakdown between projects that are 1 megawatt and below and projects that are 1 megawatt and above. And there's a further breakdown there for projects that are energized for 60 days before the IRS guidance comes out on this, and projects that are 60 days after the IRS guidance. If the IRS guidance is coming out in 180 days from August 15th, then a lot of this is going to be applicable to the before 60 days before IRS guidance, because all these projects are eligible for the 30% investment tax credit starting in 2022, and for the energy community and domestic content tax bonuses as soon as they're built in 2023. So it's there now. So one of the categories there of those bonus credits is what is it? Energy community and low income communities. There's a lot of question about that, because I think in a later slide here I'll show the definition of what it means to what they mean by energy community and low income communities. And it's pretty complicated, and there's a lot of art in it and interpreting it. And a number of different organizations have tried to model this since the bill was passed, in anticipation of the guidance coming out. And Vibrant Clean Energy is an organization that we've worked with both in Michigan and in comments we did in the My Healthy Climate Plan, and also nationally with a group called Local Solar for All that's done modeling on distributed generation nationally, and how the cheapest path to decarbonization is with a high distributed energy future. But a service that Vibrant Clean Energy has done in the last couple of weeks is they took those definitions and they used their extensive, very granular mapping and geolocation abilities that's in their software to try to figure out what is an energy community and low income, like what areas meet those definitions. And what they came up with, this is a map that shows what a map of projects that are census block groups, I believe, that are either in a low income or energy community. So this is an overlap. This is a both communities, but you can see a huge part of the land mass of the state of Michigan. And I just did the Lower Peninsula here. If there's Upers here, I apologize. I was just trying to keep it neat. But a similar percentage of the land mass up there is in one of these two communities, and is going to be eligible just by virtue of being in this place, of being in of accessing this bonus tax credit. And it's hard to see on the map, but a huge portion of Metro Detroit is in that also. So the definition of energy community, I put it here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see it's a fairly complicated formula that relies on pulling together data sources from all kinds of different things. And there's if you start to read the some of the work that people have done on deciding, interpreting how broadly to interpret these, you start to see very quickly that there is a decent amount of uncertainty there. But a lot of, if you have a site that you're talking about and that is you want to develop on it, it might be clear and may not be easily whether or not it's going to be eligible. For example, in Minnesota, Xcel Energy has been talking about building a giant 450 megawatt project on a retiring coal facility. And, it's pretty much like by definition in here that something that's on the site of a retiring fossil plant is going to be eligible for that. So they knew automatically that it was ready to go, and they were actually ready and sought and received commission approval to build that project based on their assumption that they were going to be eligible for this bonus tax credit. So that's energy community. Those low income allocated bonus credits are also important. The definition of low income communities here seems pretty straightforward, but you're going to have to you'll have, in order to look at your census tract and say is it eligible or not, you can do this, or you can wait for the guidance. But some communities are going to be pretty clearly inside of it, some are going to be not. And then within those qualified low income areas, there have to be qualified low income projects. And the definition of qualified low income projects, I've read this definition, these two definitions, over and over and over, and I still, you can envision projects that would qualify and would easily meet this, and you can imagine projects that would be a little more tough to say whether it is. For example, I was talking with John Delury, who's my colleague in the region today, and would a single family home be a qualified low income economic benefit project, in that it would be if at least 50% of the financial benefits of the electricity produced by such facility are provided to households with income of less than 200% of the poverty line? You would think so. And if you were Sunrun or an installer who is putting together, a portfolio of 100 such projects, and they were all met that definition, and each one of them, would that project, would that sort of batch of finance that the third party owner is processing be eligible for this tax credit? I don't know. And I know that the large finance companies are looking at that really hard right now. And then the other complication of this is that if you are eligible for that, you're still going to have to get in line with all the other people who want a piece of that 1.87 gigawatts per year of these allocated low income credits. And then the last part I just wanted to highlight here before we move on is the manufacturing credit. And manufacturers of all of these components of PV installations are eligible for credits too. Specifically, there's a manufacturing.
Can I put on earphones?
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
The manufacturers will be eligible for either a 30% investment tax credit on the capital cost of their factory, or they'll be eligible for a production tax credit based on each panel that goes through. So for example, in 2023, PV modules would be eligible for 7 cents a watt production tax credit, and that goes to the manufacturer, and that will reduce their cost of production and their cost of the goods that they're selling to all of you to install them on your homes and businesses. It's not just the modules, it's the inverters, it's the trackers, and then there's a separate credit available for manufacturers of batteries. So all of those things combined are like I said, sort of supercharging the solar everywhere in the country. I want to give credit here to a resource that the Solar Energy Industries Association put out right after, I think it was actually before the House passed it, but the House passed version after the Senate passed it. The House passed version was identical, and this resource, and I'll put a link in and we'll share the slides so you can get this, is a really good resource for this. There is a public version and a members version. I don't have the members version, but anyone can get access to the television. So that was all I had to share today, and I thank everyone for your attention.
Well, Will, thank you so very much. This was fantastic. I know that's there's probably a bunch of questions, but let me kick one up to begin with. So in Michigan, we're with Dow Chemical, Dow Corning, we're pretty deep in module, solar cell manufacturing, at least raw material and stuff. And there's some assembly operations and stuff going in now. Is there anything in the IRA production tax credit that deals with embedded carbon? So, green steel versus over steel, green concrete, low embedded carbon, solar panels and modules versus non-low embedded. Is there anything in there that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's a lot on domestic content, but not on carbon.
Okay.
I didn't even really touch it much on the domestic content, which could be a whole other, suite of
Sure.
workshops and things that are going to be
Right. Okay, excellent, great. Dave Curtis, you're on. Dave, take yourself on mute.
There we go. So my question is, how long do you think it will take vendors to wade through the gobbledygook of all the stuff that you just mentioned that I don't understand? And given time, of course.
Yeah, that's a great question because, well, a couple of things. One is, first of all, if you're an American manufacturer of any of these components that are going to be required here, my understanding is they've already booked all of their production for the next several years, and I know that the big developers, the big multinational developers have been gobbling up American production even before the IRA, and so yeah, SIA has a separate line of like inquiry or whatever. If you go look on their website, there are a couple of things where they've been talking about how quickly they think domestic manufacturing is going to be able to ramp up to meet those needs. I don't see, they have different, different parts of the manufacturing stack are going to come online at different times. I think the earliest, easiest to address parts of the chain are like assembly, and they see assembly getting onshored much more quickly than like polysilicon processing. So, different parts are going to be coming online. I think that they talk about a timeline between like 24 and 27 before much, stuff that meets the domestic content requirements is going to be available.
Excellent. John Goulet, you're on.
Thanks, Mark. Will, can you say anything about how nonprofit organizations are going to be able to get the direct payment for solar installations?
Yeah, again, that'll have to be come out in guidance. I imagine it's going to look a lot like the 1603B grants did in back in after the 2008 infrastructure bill. So I don't know that it will be. Obviously, it's there. It's part of the statute, and yeah.
But Will, for those of us that are not familiar with what you referenced, maybe you can just kind of explain it real quickly, how that general model works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's for organizations that don't have tax liability or given the ability to receive the value of what would have been a tax credit in the form of a direct check. And like in 2008, with what was the name of that bill, John? I can't even remember. But whatever, it was the Obama Recovery Act. There was a program that was done so that anyone was eligible to receive the 1603B grant directly, and there was a long, complicated application that you had to prove eligibility for, and that included like, for nonprofits, some financial information, registration information, design a system, and then you also had to verify that you were actually doing it over the course of the 5 years. You had to submit 5 years worth of production data. So that's what I'd expect. I think they've got a process in place, and they'll probably just replicate it.
So the bottom line is that rather than having your taxes be reduced to the federal government, as if when you have a tax liability, a nonprofit will get a check sent to the nonprofit in the mail for 30% of the cost of the system.
Or
Right.
40 or 50.
Okay.
Right, that's what we're expecting. But just before I let you move on to the next question, where should we watch for information about how to cash in on this?
I mean, it's going to be coming through the Treasury Department. And I would keep your eye on John Freeman.
Yeah. Yeah. GLREA will be putting out a lot about this.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, there are organizations that, SIA and the big national trade associations are going to be writing all this tax guidance pretty hard. I've been encouraging my organization and our partners, that we work with, like Solar United Neighbors and Grid Alternatives, who actually have more of a federal presence, to be active in this Treasury guidance, because the development programs, there's going to be a lot of attention to how this affects utility scale and large C&I developers. There's going to be less to how these low income programs are implemented, and I think having those national organizations with who care about low income and community solar pay attention to this is going to be important.
Excellent. Great question, John. Let's move on to Rob Rafson. Rob, you're on.
Hey, everybody. Just my comment on the overall, I believe that the maximum amount of the tax credit can be is 50%, adding up however you put your stack together. At least that's how I read it. Also, I believe there's going to be two ways to get the money. One is organizations that have a tax credit, even if they have no tax liability and they still apply a tax credit, they'll get the rebate just like a rebate check, as if you had put the money in prepaying your taxes. And then there'll be a separate program through the Treasury for everybody else. That's how I read it. And you're right. I think it's going to be a incredible time between now and the end of the year when the guidance has to come out, because the IRS needs to apply those rules. And last thing is, you asked earlier, how do contractors? Oh yes, we're already actively involved in putting in our estimates going forward the projects and the economics of them.
Outstanding.
Rob, have you tried to figure out what's in things that are in energy communities and include that in your estimates? That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Are people comfortable with it? I've been very interested in that.
I think yes. I think in general the key is, and domestic content is going to be very interesting, because there are two parts of domestic content. There's 2% for having at least 40% of the project be domestically manufactured, and who knows what that all is going to be. That still has to come in a guidance. And then there's 8% for paying prevailing wage and having a apprenticeship program. So that's the domestic content part. And it's a question of whether you're going to have that part to then have the other incentives on top. And that's how it looks to me right now. But again, there are a lot of lobby groups from all sorts of people, including the utilities who are against it, and other groups that are very for it, to see how this is going to come out. And so guidance is going to be everything. And I believe it has to come out by the end of the year, because they have to do taxes, actually.
We got less than 20 minutes, so I want to keep things moving. Michelle, you're up. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Thanks. I had to unmute. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And my question is pretty quick. It's from the homeowner perspective. Are these credits for new systems only, or are they for expanding a current system or renewing elements of a current system? I have a solar array on my house that I've had since 2007. I'd like to expand it. Is this a good time to do this and get these credits?
Probably,
Yeah.
yes. Like any new equipment will be eligible for the credit.
So even if it's just replacing something that's getting old, like my inverter or something like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, as a follow-up to that, if an individual, let's say like Michelle or myself with our solar systems, if we bought into the utility-sponsored in Detroit is My Green Energy, do we get a tax credit for buying utility green power?
No,
No.
they get that.
No, okay, they get it.
It
Okay.
will, for the My Green Power program, it will reduce the utilities cost to build the assets that they're putting
Right.
into the portfolio, and it will
Nice. Yeah.
further make it, it'll reduce your subscription rate
Are you sure about that?
eventually when these projects.
Well, it might increase the subscription rate. You never know.
But
All right. I said it might increase the subscription rate. You never know. Joe, you're up.
Thank you. And thanks for a good presentation. My question is pretty simple. With so many components of this huge act that touch so many different organizations, both public and private, what do we know about the intake portal for applications? Will there be a single one? Will there be many? Who and where?
Well, for most of these, it just happens in your taxes. If you're a business that puts a solar array on your roof, the year after you build it, you're just going to take a tax credit on your income tax form. So it doesn't. There's not an application or anything to be processed per se. It's just a line on your income tax form.
And will the same be true for nonprofits then?
Well, I think that process I was talking about applying for direct pay is going to be more involved. And
do you know whom and what level of government that's going to be? What department?
Well, with the 1603B grant there's a Department of Treasury. It's the Treasury Department's program, but the Department of Energy.
Right. For Eagle, probably the energy office in Michigan, they'll be giving grants out through those. And typically when you apply for that grant, you would submit the design from a reputable solar installer who would, put the cost. It's be similar to getting a Michigan Saves loan. You'd need the design from the proof of bonding and all permits and all that stuff. But it's fairly most of the solar companies in Michigan who go after help people get money through Michigan Saves. It's a routine process. So DLAG, they give out grants all the time. So Eagle. So my sense is that will be a fairly straightforward process. All right, Mary Braun.
Hi, thanks. So, Will, I have a question, and I apologize if it's outside your wheelhouse. So I know you're talking a lot about tax credits. Which, I mean, tax credits are great, but they don't really do a whole lot to offset the upfront cost, right? You get that money back later, but it doesn't offset the upfront cost. And for a lot of these energy justice communities, low, moderate income households, that's a huge barrier, the upfront cost, even with, the Michigan Saves and the loans and financing options, they still predatory lending practices and all of that. Like they might not have the credit score that they need to finance the project. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about where in the IRA that is addressed, right? Like how, direct funding to offset those upfront costs. And again, if that's outside your wheelhouse, then that's totally fine. But I just thought I'd pose it since you obviously have a lot of information about it. You're muted.
You're on mute, Will.
How did I mute myself? There is a whole separate part of the bill that has a lot of grants and a lot of resources directed toward low income and environmental justice communities. that I have not digested yet. There's not a general low income program that's going to fund these projects on low income customers directly, though, that I'm aware of.
I've heard some talk that it would be part of the LIHEAP program, but I don't think that's
Yeah.
firm. Just people talking.
There's opportunities for states to design programs that they could then implement to do that. But I don't think there's a national direct pay program.
I think that there's some provision in the in there for low income to grant ahead of the, basically be front funded.
Right.
It is totally unclear what that
Totally
means or
unclear.
how it's going to be implemented. But
Right.
there is a front funding.
Like a financing mechanism?
Probably.
And I know they talked about money going towards green banks, but I wasn't sure if that had been expanded on yet or
There is
anything.
a ton of money available for green banks.
Right.
But again, that'll have to be a state by state.
State by state.
program.
Okay.
I know that Michigan Saves is looking at getting a chunk of that. And so they may even have a program for low income because they've got other programs now. That may be how it gets done. So,
Okay.
All right,
Okay.
let's keep
Well,
moving.
thanks.
Margot, you're next. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, my question is for the Unitarian Universalist Church. We're very interested in solar for our building. It was a former school, but we're wondering if we can replace a roof, put solar on top of that, and then would the cost of both be eligible or not?
Talk to a tax attorney.
Yeah, that's a good
Rob?
question.
Rob's smiling. Rob wants to say something.
I think that has been a discussion, and
Yeah.
about half of tax accountants say yes and half don't. So
Right.
you definitely need to talk to your advisors on that one. But there is indications that they're more favorable to include the roof as part of the project.
Great.
Just my 2 cents. I understand that if you used bidirectional, or I'm sorry, not bidirectional, bifacial solar panels and put a EPC roof or an EPA roof,
Right.
a big roof, that it's been accepted as part of the IRS.
Right.
That's a pretty direct link to improving the output of the system.
Right.
I think you have a pretty strong case there.
I keep looking, Margot, because even if you didn't have tax credit, typically that's the best time to put solar up is when you're fixing the roof anyway. So there's a sweet spot in here for sure. So thanks for your question. Ken?
Hi, I'm with a condo association that put a new solar installation on our common house this year. Would that be, and we don't have any tax liability, would it be possible to apply for those, what are they called, credits or whatever, for something that was installed in 2022?
I don't know about that. You would go look in that direct pay part of the statute and try to figure that. I can't remember when the eligibility for that starts. Like, for example, those bonus tax credits, the energy communities and the domestic content requirements start only for systems energized in 23. But I don't know.
Could you give me a number or a section number or something to find that section of the act?
Yeah, I'll look it up and provide it.
Okay.
But one thing you might look at, Ken, you could certainly expand the system, add batteries and EV charging, and all of that would be eligible for tax credits going forward.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I get that. But we just spent 40K on a system for our common house.
Yep, I get it.
And there was no tax credits at that time.
Do you guys file taxes?
We do file taxes, but we don't end up with any liability.
Oh.
Yeah, but when you
Right.
file 3468, that form is what you're going to use to do your investment tax credit.
Right.
And it comes back as a rebate after your taxes are filed.
Right.
That's how it looks like it's going to be.
Right. So, but the question is about whether something installed this year would be eligible.
It would.
Yeah. Yeah. This year.
Yeah, it goes from 26 to 30%.
That for sure. Yeah, I'm just not.
There's a
sure.
26% tax credit that you can get in the form of a rebate. Yes.
No, but what
Okay.
Ken's question is if you've already installed a solar system this year and you were under the assumption it was only going to be a 26% investment tax credit, now that the bill was enacted in August, is it
You get a
retroactive
30
for all of 2022?
For 30%.
for 30%. Maybe.
Well, but our question is 30% versus 0, because our understanding was that since we don't have a tax liability under the old law, we couldn't claim anything.
That's incorrect.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
I'm not.
yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. John Goulet. Is it wait before I go, John? Is there anybody else that's got a question before John? Okay, go ahead, John.
Okay, I just wanted to make kind of a side remark to Michelle, who's asking about enlarging a system. It sounds like her system is old enough that she's got net metering. And if she tries to enlarge the system now, she's going to lose her net metering,
Right,
which will be a really big loss.
Good point.
That's all.
But John, the net metering was only grandfathered in for 10 years in the 2018 update. So she might have already passed the 10 years grandfathering clause anyway.
I have, yes, thank you. Yes,
Right.
thank you for that point.
I have a question for Will. And then
Please.
there's one question in the chat. Will, you started off your conversation saying that Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse have come out nationally saying that they think the impact of this bill has been underestimated. Can you expand on what that means and why they say that?
There was an article that came out. I think you're right, John. It was like more than a week ago from Credit Suisse. It was an article in the Atlantic that we can put, in the follow-up, put a link to it for people who haven't seen it. But I haven't seen the actual report, but they were saying that, the estimates for this bill were $369 billion. And they were saying that it might be as much as 800 billion, because all those PTCs and the manufacturing tax credit and the ITC and the two energy community and domestic content things are only limited by, they're not limited, they're uncapped. And so they were saying it might be as much as $800 billion spending on this. And then I recently saw it, I think it was in the last couple of days, that Goldman Sachs is basically saying the same thing. And I would have to go find the article there. But the other little anecdotal data point is I was at Renewable Energy Plus, which is the former Solar Power International, a couple of weeks ago in Anaheim, and the energy is palpable, and people are like green light and running forward on this.
John, did you said there was something in the chat? John Kinch?
Yeah, Will
Or John
Paddock.
Freeman?
Yeah, Will Paddock asked a question about electric vehicle tax credits. Can you say anything about that in the next 30 seconds?
It's a whole different can of worms that I don't have much knowledge about.
Okay, we'll have to have you come back some other time and after you've had a chance to focus on that. So Mark, let's go back to Dave and Lynn for the last two questions.
Let's get Lynn first. Dave's had a chance here. Lynn, unmute, please.
Just a comment, I suppose all of these tax credits are based on the fact that all the income will come in that we're requesting through the various forms.
No, they're going to be there whether the income comes in or not. Yeah. Okay, Dave, you're on. Last question.
I just wanted to comment that Michelle's controller, if she's upgrading her system to a larger size and needs to replace her controller, that controller is probably valuable to someone who's installing a similar size system that she has now. So it's not a loss, really.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, Mark,
Well,
Mark, let's
yes.
do one more question from the chat.
Okay.
Back to the question about nonprofits. Will, are you suggesting that we must simply move forward with our projects and then hope for a direct payment? Or is there not a portal to vet our ideas first?
There is not yet.
No. No. In fact, if you're going to get a grant, there'll be guidelines for those grants, probably from Eagle for nonprofits.
I think that all of this will become clear when guidance comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be doing Zoom things on those guidances, probably for, separate ones for business, manufacturing and nonprofit. We'll be doing separate Zooms on those. So stay tuned. Well, I want to thank Will and my collaborator in all this, John Freeman, GLREA's esteemed executive director. Will, this was fantastic. We want to have you come back many, many times. Michigan is trying to catch up. I was listening to all this manufacturing stuff, and my head was spinning, knowing that the Michigan Manufacturers Association has spent decades, weakening the state so our manufacturers can't rally up for this. So it's going to be interesting to see, what the manufacturing community in Michigan does when they realize they're going to miss so many opportunities under this because of the guidance that they've incorrectly followed from others over the last 15, 20 years. But we've got a lot of good companies, really good companies. I think that are in a position to rally up, including McNaughton, McKay, and others to, jump up for this. And of course, we've got Dow Corning and Dow Chemical, and for them to reach down into the supply chain, certainly there's an incentive for them to do so as well. So I think we're well positioned to step our game up here.
That's exciting. Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, please come back. GLREA's annual meeting is going to be held in December. We've got some exciting speakers that are coming up. John Freeman, do you want to say something about that?
Well, the year-on-year begin meeting is on Saturday, December 3rd. And we're going to have a series of speakers, including Mark Jacobson, who's a professor from Stanford, who is going to be talking about the fact that he has developed a plan for every single state on how they can meet the renewable energy needs. 3 or 4 years ago, when you first put this out, he was kind of laughed at, but now it's proven to be very accurate that states can, as well as countries, can develop plans to make the complete transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy and not sacrifice our lifestyle or not sacrifice the ability for manufacturers and for everybody to access electricity. So with that, I want to thank Will for joining us tonight. And for all those that are not members at GLREA, I would certainly encourage you to join the organization so that we can continue doing this really important work. So thank you very much and have a wonderful evening.